Hello and welcome to another show. Today we're going to rank all 8 of Roger Corman's Edgar Allan Poe adaptations.
Her will rots with her bones. Both are as damned and dead as the devil's soul.
In the meantime, I'll brighten up that dreary old house.
Suddenly there came a tapping, as of someone gently rapping at my chamber door. Nevermore. I see you no longer turn away from the cruelties of life.
I no longer care.
I had very specific theories about how to shoot the works of Poe. First, I felt that if I was dealing with the unconscious mind receives information from the eyes, the ears, and so forth, but is not really aware of the exterior world.
Alone. Just the two of us. Together.
A woman possessed by love. A man obsessed by terror. Only Edgar Allan Poe could create such ever-increasing suspense. No matter how desperately he fought, his life became a nightmare of death.
No! You're dead!
Until reality and madness became one.
His father was prematurely interred.
I heard his voice.
All right, then prove it.
I will.
Now we come to the film Premature Burial, 1962. Set in the dark Victorian era, the film follows Guy Carrell, a British aristocrat who is consumed with the fear of being buried alive. His fear becomes so overwhelming it nearly prevents him from marrying his fiancée Emily. He tells her that he, like his father, suffers from a cataleptic disease which can make one appear to be dead. Guy then takes Emily down to the family catacomb and claims that when he was a boy, he heard his father scream from his tomb after being interred, even though his sister Katie insists it was all in his mind. But despite all this, Emily tells Guy that she still wants to marry him. This is one of the Roger Corman Edgar Allan Poe movies that I haven't seen, so I'll share what the critics said about the production. Reviews for the Premature Burial were less favorable than those for Corman's previous Poe adaptations. Howard Thompson of the New York Times praised the handsomely tinted Gothic settings and compelling music, but found the film static, slack, and starchily written. Variety wrote that Corman seems to have run thin in imagination on this third trip to the same literary well. Not only is the plotting in Premature Burial discouragingly predictable, but its gloomy and cavernous interior setting is peculiarly similar to those in the first two picks. The Los Angeles Times agreed that the film was gloomily predictable and suggested that American International may be running a good thing into the ground. The Monthly Film Bulletin wrote that there are some sequences well worth watching, notably Guy's hallucinatory vision of being buried alive, but found that the outlandish horror of the original story is never really caught, and Corman obtains most of his efforts from rude shock cuts, rather than from intelligent exploitation of the situations and settings. Roger Corman had made 2 successful adaptations of Edgar Allan Poe's works for American International Pictures starring Vincent Price. He decided to make his own Poe film with financing from Pathé Lab, a company that did the print work for AIP and had backed a few of their productions as well. Corman wanted to use Price, but AIP had him under contract, so he cast instead Ray Milland.
Will you tell Guy that I would like to see him? I'm afraid he doesn't wish to see you.
On the first day of shooting, James H. Nicholson and Sam Arkoff of AIP turned up, announcing to Corman that they were working together again, as they were able to convince Pathé to bring the movie back to AIP after threatening to pull all future lab work with them.
I made a mistake. Was that so very wrong?
Though I live at night, my vision is painfully acute.
Tomb of Ligeia. This story, based on Poe's Ligeia, funeral takes place at the site of Castle Acre Priory. The casket has a window, allowing the face of a beautiful young woman to be seen. A black cat jumps in the coffin and seems to steal the soul of the woman. The widower, Verdun Fell, played by Vincent Price, is both mournful about it and feels threatened by the death of his wife, Ligeia. He had sensed her soul's reluctance to die and was concerned about her near blasphemous statements about God, because you see, she was an atheist.
You tried to attack me.
You must trust me. Give over your will to mine.
He's alone and troubled by an eye condition that requires him to wear dark glasses. Belle would shun the world. Vincent Price in those shades. It's worth the watch alone. Never mind that he's way too old for the title character and a little creakier than in other Roger Corman Poe adaptations. The original short story is barely a story. It's a brief shot at an idea and a vibe. Screenwriter Robert Towne vastly expanded on Poe's concept by plugging in several other themes from his work. Mostly, Towne doubles down on the necrophilia, creating an uncomfortable tone, which again causes the Tomb of Ligeia to stand apart from the previous Corman riffs. There's a danger to this film, a sting that never lingers, but when it appears, it's satisfying. Shot on a 25-day schedule in the UK, a big difference to the 15-day schedule used in the US for the previous Roger Corman Poe movies. The director attributed this extra time to the British crew's obsession with taking tea breaks.
As we'd start shooting, we'd just be getting organized, and it was time for 11s. We would stop at 11 o'clock and have something to eat. Then we would work a while, go to lunch, work a while, and then we'd be stopping for tea.
Director Roger Corman has referred to this movie as the biggest and most exciting of all his Edgar Allan Poe adaptations. The exterior of the building is a real building. It is Castle Acre Priory in Norfolk, UK, which is a National Heritage Monument, and was still open to the public as of 2018. Fake parts of scenery added just for the movie include the tombstones seen among the ruins, and the tallest part of the residential wing, which does not exist in reality. Roger Corman gave up his producer credit to Pat Green in order to qualify for a British subsidy to make the movie. The dream sequence appears to be shot in slow motion, but if you watch closely, you'll see it's being filmed at normal speed with the actor simply moving slowly. Corman did this deliberately to give the scene an additional air of unreality. One of the reasons this is low on the list, despite it being the most lavish visually of Corman's Poe adaptations, is because of the pacing. The first hour is slow and it takes a while to pick up the pace. The transformation to the screen doesn't quite work. A great deal of the action in the short story takes place in the narrator's head, and to make a feature-length movie out of it, there must be some added action and characters. The action drags more and more as the film goes on, and the sense of horror and tension dissipates, rather than builds as the film progresses. Tales of Terror. 3 short sequences based on the following Poe tales are told: Morella, the Black Cat, which is combined with another Poe tale, The Cask of Amontillado, and The Facts in the Case of M. Vladimir. Each sequence is introduced via voiceover narration by Vincent Price, who also appears in all 3 narratives. First is Morella. When Lenora Locke travels from Boston to be reunited with her father in his decrepit and cobwebbed mansion, she finds him drunk, disordered, and depressed. He refuses her company, insisting that she killed her mother Morella in childbirth. Lenora then discovers her mother's body decomposing on a bed in the house. In The Black Cat, Montresor Herringbone hates his wife Annabelle and her black cat. One night, on a ramble about town, he happens upon a wine tasting event and challenges the world's foremost wine taster, Fortunato Lucrezi, to a contest. Herringbone successfully identifies each wine, but becomes drunk. Lucrezi escorts him home and meets his wife. In the facts in the case of M. Vladimir, dying from a painful disease, M. Ernest Vladimir employs a hypnotist, Mr. Carmichael, to alleviate his suffering by putting him under various trances. He then remains between the worlds of the living and the dead. In a trance, Vladimir begs Carmichael to release his soul so he can die, but Carmichael cruelly refuses. The Black Cat segment was recycled for the Comedy of Terrors in 1963. Many of the same actors appear in both films, only here Peter Lorre plays the drunk married to devoted Joyce Jameson, with Vincent Price introduced as the third member of the triangle. In Comedy of Terrors, Price and Lorre exchange roles, but Jameson essentially repeats her performance. Not only that, but Price's line, "What place is this?" from the M. Vladimir segment of Tales of Terror is recycled as a running gag for Basil Rathbone in Comedy of Terrors. For the Black Cat, Vincent Price based his character of Fortunato on Ernie Kovac's television character, Percy Dovetonsils. The Sacramento horror punk band Tales of Terror named themselves after this movie. Between takes, the actors would toss Peter Lorre's fake head around. Well, all of the actors except Lorre, that is. That prop scared the hell out of the veteran horror star, and he would not touch it.
The book. The book.
We come up to the Haunted Palace. In 1765, the inhabitants of Arkham, Massachusetts, are suspicious of the strange phenomena surrounding the Grand Palace that overlooks the town. They suspect the palace's owner, Joseph Curwen, to be a warlock. A young girl wanders up to the palace in a trance-like state. She is led by Curwen and his mistress, Hester, down into the dungeon. The girl is subject to a strange ritual in which an unseen creature rises up from the covered pit. The townspeople observe the girl wandering off, and they storm the palace to confront its owner. Though the girl appears unharmed, the townspeople surmise that she has been bewitched to forget what happened to her.
You see, it's haunted. Well, not by ghosts, but haunted nonetheless.
They drag Curwen out to a tree where they insist to burn him. The mob leader, Ezra Wheaton, insists that they do not harm Hester, to whom he has been previously engaged to marry. Before being burned alive, Curwen puts a curse on Arkham and its inhabitants, and their descendants, promising to rise from the grave to take his revenge.
For from this night onward, you shall bear my curse.
One annoying feature of the Corman Poe movies was their habit of splashing non-sequitur lines of Poe stories or poetry on the beginning and or the end of the movie, apropos of nothing. Certainly not anything we've just seen on screen. But here the Haunted Palace really takes the cake, since it's not even based on anything Poe ever wrote. And divorced of the original context, the lines of Poe that are slapped onto it almost literally have no meaning at all. Of the films in the series, this is probably the most faithful adaptation. But it's an adaptation of The Case of Charles Dexter Ward by H.P. Lovecraft, which is one of Lovecraft's best novellas. The movie is a wonder of art direction. It has some memorable, eerie scenes of mutant townspeople, and a nice dual performance by Price. Roger Corman decided to do an H.P. Lovecraft story as a break from his Edgar Allan Poe series, while keeping the elements that made it successful. American International took no chances. It gave the film a Poe title and marketed it as another in the series. This film represents the first time literary work by H.P. Lovecraft was adapted for the screen. The author completed it in 1927, but it was not published until after his death. This movie was the last theatrical film appearance of Deborah Paget. Despite appearances, Lon Chaney Jr. was not that much older than Vincent Price. They were born only 5 years apart, Chaney in 1906 and Price in 1911. Chaney's much older appearance is partially due to makeup, but also due to poor health and rough living. Chaney would pass away 10 years after this film, while Price lived another 30. The film includes the first film depiction of the Necronomicon, a fictional grimoire, which is a textbook of magic. It's been depicted in tales by H.P. Lovecraft, August Derleth, Clark Ashton Smith, and several writers inspired by their stories. Its name is Greek for an image of the law of the dead. It references the Greek terms nekros, dead, nomos, law, and icon, which is icon or image. The film was completed in April 1963 and is one of only 2 films teaming Vincent Price and Lon Chaney Jr., the other being Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein in 1948.
Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered, weak and weary.
What else was I supposed to think?
All right, never mind.
The Raven. The plot of The Raven: in the year 1506, the sorcerer Dr. Erasmus Craven has been mourning the death of his wife, Lenore.
Shall I ever hold again that radiant maiden whom the angels call Lenore?
For over 2 years, much to the dismay of his daughter, which would be Lenore's stepdaughter, Estelle. One night he is visited by a raven, the wizard Dr. Bedloe. Together they brew a potion that restores Bedloe to human form. The Raven would not have made the cut if we ranked Edgar Allan Poe adaptations based on their accuracy.
Rabbit's lard. Dead man's hair.
No, we don't keep those things in this house. We're vegetarian.
The poem must be one of the most popular poems ever crafted, and the idea of adapting it is rather absurd. Of course, Roger Corman would give it a go with his pal Vincent Price and a few other horror movie legends. Boris Karloff and Peter Lorre, to name a few. What remains from the Poe piece is the titular creature and a grieving man. What's added are wizards, rivalries, magic duels, and Jack Nicholson. It's an utterly ridiculous exercise, but the attempt is a damn delight, and every actor carries tremendous charm, even when a few of them have no idea what they're doing with it. The movie works best for those who can remove themselves off their high horse and just have a good, silly time at the movies. Peter Lorre and Jack Nicholson were fond of ad-libbing their lines, much to the annoyance of Boris Karloff, who was working from the script.
Afraid, my dear? There's nothing to be afraid.
Jack Nicholson always gave high praise to everyone he worked with on the set, except one, the Raven. He said the Raven pooped on everyone, but especially liked to poop on him. He later said, "I would look down when the Raven flew off my shoulder, and it would be covered in poop. I hated that bird." According to Roger Corman, the hostility between Jack Nicholson and Peter Lorre as father and son came from the actors rather than the script.
If you do that once more, I'll smash you one right in the face.
Dr. Bedloe, please.
He's my son!
Boris Karloff is also in The Raven, 1935 version. Both movies are inspired by Edgar Allan Poe's classic poem, but they each have their own story. With the exception of the previous year's Tales of Terror, which boasted a cast of Vincent Price, Peter Lorre, Deborah Paget, and Basil Rathbone, this was the next closest that low-budget director Roger Corman ever came to having an all-star cast. Yet, despite the salaries of Vincent Price, Boris Karloff, and Peter Lorre, it was reputedly produced at a cost of about $350,000. And it went on to become one of Corman's biggest box office hits, grossing $1.5 million. Now, Vincent Price, as the sorcerer Dr. Erasmus Craven, inspired the creation of Doctor Strange in Marvel Comics, and in fact became creator Steve Ditko's model for the Sorcerer Supreme. Doctor Strange's full name is Stephen Vincent Strange, in Price's honor. A novelization of the film was written by Eunice Sudak, adapted from Richard Matheson's screenplay and published by Lancer Books in paperback. This is more of a satire than a true terror movie. It is immaculately staged, stylishly realized, very literate, confidently made, and plenty of eye-popping scenes. terror has strangely never been more skillfully spoofed than in this agreeable horror comedy Corman directed. Our next film in this collection is Mask of the Red Death from 1964. On a mountain in medieval Italy, the old woman meets a red-cloaked figure shuffling tarot cards. The figure gives her a white rose, which then turns red and dappled with blood. Prince Prospero, a Satanist, visits the villagers he rules and is confronted by two starving villagers, Gino and Ludovico. Meanwhile, the old woman dies, infected with a deadly plague known as the Red Death. Upon discovering her, Prospero orders the village burned and abducts Gino, Ludovico, and Francesca, who is Ludovico's daughter and Gino's lover.
My God!
Who is your God?
He then tells the local nobility to come to his castle. We should be a society of laws, not men, they say. But who's carrying out the laws? Faced with the triumph of cruelty and avarice, with the powerlessness of the innocent and the impunity of the wicked, you can understand the twisted mindset of Vincent Price's Prospero in Roger Corman's 1964 adaptation of Edgar Allan Poe's The Mask of the Red Death.
But I beg of you, even for the humor of it, do not wear red.
A story he wrote in 1842. If a beast like Prospero can caper about unchecked, it's certainly proof that a higher power is asleep at the wheel, or that the true ruler of the cosmos believes our suffering to be the rightful order.
I see you no longer turn away from the cruelties of life.
It's a convenient worldview for a guy with a castle, an army, and a crapload of money to have. You can finish reading Poe's story inside of 2 minutes, just long enough to paint a picture of Prospero's decadence and hubris, and then see it shattered. Any adaptation of a feature length needs to make distinct choices. Corman's invests Prospero with loud and proud Satanism, and contrasts him against two young peasants, the lovers Gino and Francesca, who were played by David Weston and Jane Asher. Poe lost 3 of the most important women in his life to tuberculosis before he wrote The Mask of the Red Death. The most basic reading of it is that death is absolute and uncaring in its design, that no high wall or army will hold it back when the time comes. But there is even, in the sparest interpretation, an unmistakable relish in the way Poe inflicts the disaster on the wealthy and secure. When his dominions were half depopulated, he pulls all the weight it needs to. Prospero has danced and fiddled while his lands have burned. Corman hones in on that part and tasks Price with making Prospero maleficence and hubris explicit.
How like a pig you are. Be one.
The movie is about the inevitability of death, but it's also about the comeuppance.
Each man creates his own God for himself, his own heaven, his own hell.
Jane Asher asked Roger Corman if a friend could visit the set and join them for lunch. She explained that her friend was a musician who was about to do his first gig in London that night. At the end of lunch, Corman wished him good luck with his concert. Roger Corman had never heard of Paul McCartney until he read of the concert's success in the next day's newspapers. Hop Toad and Esmeralda were drawn from Edgar Allan Poe's short story, Hop Frog. That story was inspired by an actual incident in 1393 where French King Charles VI and 5th of his lords dressed and chained themselves as wild men at a masquerade, and their costumes caught fire from a stray spark. 4 of the lords died, and the incident became known as the Bal des Ardents, Ball of the Burning Men. Roger Corman had originally wanted this to be his second Poe picture, following the success of House of Usher. He passed it over because he felt that certain plot elements were too close to Ingmar Bergman's recent The Seventh Seal from 1957. Roger Corman and Daniel Haller were able to make this film look more opulent than earlier productions. Using the sets left from Beckett, the two movies also shared one actor, David Weston. who plays Gino here and played Brother John in Beckett. Jane Asher was 17 years old during filming. She turned 18 in April 1964. In an in-depth interview in the Cult Cinema Retro magazine, issue number 18, Corman nominated The Mask of the Red Death, alongside The Intruder from 1962, and X, The Man with the X-Ray Eyes from 1963, as his personal favorites among his own films.
Into a hell of violence.
The Negroes will literally, and I do mean literally, control the South.
Ray Milland, in his most challenging role since his Academy Award-winning Lost Weekend, X, the man with the X-ray eyes.
Hop Toad's wife, Esmeralda, was played by Verena Greenlaw, who was only a child at the time. Dialogue was looped by an adult actress. A rather long tirade from this film has been featured as a sample in the metal band Theater of Tragedy's 1996 song, And When He Falleth. I find this film to be an acquired taste, sinister, yet beautiful. This proves to be Corman's most divisive of his Poe adaptations. It's more of an intellectual horror film, as it chooses to highlight black magic over blood to its viewers.
My first encounter with Edgar Allan Poe was a school assignment when I was maybe 12 or 13 years old. Wrote a rather lengthy essay, which got a nice grade from the teacher, and I was so much enthralled with the story, I asked my parents for the complete works of Poe.
What is the meaning of this?
House of Usher in 1960. Philip Winthrop, played by Mark Damon, travels to the House of Usher, a desolate mansion surrounded by a murky swamp, to see his fiancée, Madeline Usher, played by Myrna Fahey. Madeline's brother Roderick, Vincent Price of course, opposes Philip's intentions, telling the young man that the Usher family is afflicted by a cursed bloodline, which has driven all their ancestors to madness, and even affected the mansion itself, causing the surrounding countryside to become desolate. Edgar Allan Poe, Roger Corman, and Vincent Price have each gifted horror fans with numerous gems, so it should surprise no one that a collaboration between the three would deliver the goods. House of Usher is the first of a half dozen or so Poe adaptations, directed by Corman and starring Price. The Generations, with a little something called insanity, or gullibility, take your pick.
Roderick Usher was a highly intelligent, educated, sensitive, and slightly out of his mind character. And without going too deeply into the out of the mind aspect of it, I felt Vincent embodied all of those characteristics.
Did you know that I could hear the scratching of her fingernails on the casket lid?
You are mad.
Corman's film checks all the boxes and will be hard to beat. Lurid color photography, melodramatic turns by Price and Myrna Fahey, and production design that walks a fine line between Corman's cheapness and the perfect home for a screwed-up lineage. As a bonus, the film is a rarity in that Price appears both without his mustache and with bleached blonde hair. Beautifully terrifying indeed. The film marked a major change in the career of Roger Corman. Instead of producing two low-budget black and white films for release as a double feature, American International agreed that he could use the budget to produce one higher budget movie in a cinemascope and color instead. Roger Corman, obsessed with fire, learned that there was an old barn in Orange County, California that was about to be demolished. He was able to strike a deal that would allow him to burn the barn at night and film it. The resulting footage was so good that it was used not only in the climax of this film, but in later Poe films as well. The stark landscape that Mark Damon rides through was the site of a fire in the Hollywood Hills. Roger Corman had heard of the fire on the radio and went to the location the next day with his crew to do the shots of Damon. Edgar Allan Poe's short story was published in 1839. This movie was filmed 121 years later. This was also the last feature film for Myrna Fahey. She would continue to work in television until her death in 1973. This was the first feature film for American International Pictures that was released and screened as a standalone film. Prior to that point, AIP packaged all their films into double features of monster movies, sci-fi flicks, and so on. They also preferred to produce them on the cheap and in black and white. That was Roger Corman's instructions going into making this film. But he convinced them to make one 15-day color film instead of two 10-day black and white films. He says there was some resistance to the idea, including from one of the AIP executives who asked Corman, "Where's the monster in the House of Usher?"
There's no monster in The Fall of the House of Usher. Thinking fairly quickly, I said, "Sam, the house is the monster."
And they got their green light. Edgar Allan Poe's stories are often very short, so the films had to elaborate and expand their ideas to justify a feature. Roger Corman gives writer Richard Matheson a for his ability to expand the story, but to stay inside the vision and mind of Poe. He adds that while most writers required multiple rewrites to reach a shooting script, Matheson's screenplays were often ready to go from the first draft, with only minor changes. Director Roger Corman and Mark Damon died 3 days apart from each other in May of 2024. Roger Corman hadn't planned on making more Edgar Allan Poe adaptations while making this film, but he still made the wise choice to leave the stairway set and others standing after production wrapped. "We managed to use it in several other films," he said. All the information about Roderick and Madeline's relatives that Roderick explained to Philip was created for the movie. None of this appears in the original Edgar Allan Poe short story. You can almost see popular culture shift by watching the work of Roger Corman. He starts the 60s making films like this, and by the end of the decade was making films like Bloody Mama. Roderick Usher has menace, but he is just so interesting it is impossible to dislike him.
2 pale drops of fire, guttering in the vast consuming darkness.
Even though these Corman films have a low budget, they always seem to deliver plenty of atmosphere.
Sounds of any exaggerated degree cut into my brain like knives.
Gehenna, Naraka, the pit, and the pendulum.
The second picture I did, The Pit and the Pendulum, however, was very difficult to adapt. The story itself was only something like 2 or 3 pages, and it depicted the hero beneath the pendulum and above the pit.
You are about to enter hell, Bartolome. Hell!
The next Corman Poe collaboration is The Pit and the Pendulum from 1961. In 1547 Spain, Englishman Francis Bernard visits the castle of his brother-in-law, Nicholas Medina, to investigate the mysterious disappearance of his sister, Elizabeth.
"I wish to see Don Medina. My name..."
"I'm sorry. Don Medina is not receiving visitors."
Nicholas and his younger sister, Catherine, offer a vague explanation that Elizabeth died from a rare blood disorder 3 months earlier. Nicholas is evasive when Francis asks for specific details. Francis vows not to leave until he discovers the truth behind his sister's death. Corman and Price reteamed for The Pit and the Pendulum and managed to recapture lightning in a bottle. The film is based on the short story of the same name, which culminates with Price's character strapping his brother-in-law to a ghastly torture device.
The only way really to make a full motion picture out of it was to treat Poe's story as the third act, if you will, of a 3-act structure. And our job was to create the first 2 acts in the style of Poe as much as we could, leading to his short story as the 3rd act.
Corman leans into the ornate dialogue and the oftentimes dreamlike logic of Poe's storytelling. And once more, the cinematography nearly steals the show from the actors. The combination of neon lighting and Corman's theatrical flourishes proved highly influential on the giallo films that came out of Italy in the subsequent decade. To increase the pendulum's sense of deadly menace, director Roger Corman took out every other frame during the editing stage, making the blade appear to move twice as fast. The film did not have an original prologue. It was added when the film was sold to TV, and a further few minutes were required to pad out the running time.
I'm going to make you suffer for your faithlessness to me.
Only Luana Anders from the original cast was available, so an extra scene of her in a madhouse was filmed and tacked on to the beginning. Now that scene does not really tie in with the rest of the film. Included among American Film Institute's 2001 list of 400 movies nominated for the top 100 most heart-pounding American movies. Actor John Kerr was worried about being strapped down to the table with the pendulum above him for the movie's climax. In order to demonstrate that it was perfectly safe, director Roger Corman stood in for Kerr while the scene was being set up. The pendulum was made out of wood and had a rubber blade. That was our show for today. What do you think? Where is your favorite Roger Corman Edgar Allan Poe adaptation on this list? Let's know your thoughts in the comments section below. And while you're at it, I'd be honored if you subscribe to my channel, ring the bell to stay informed. Also check out my Carl Vincent Vampire Hunter franchise in the comments section. Until next time, this is Kevin Given saying, live long and prosper, may the force be with you, and keep reaching for the stars.